Let's talk about brothers, specifically the first brothers. Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel, so close in blood, yet worlds apart in how they moved through life. Right from the start, you could sense the tension. Cain was the intense one, focused, driven, and deadly serious about results. If Cain were alive today, he'd be that guy waking up at 4 a.m., posting motivational quotes about the grind, and secretly believing that sheer effort should automatically equal success. He was the prototype of the hustle culture. Then there was Abel. He was different. Quiet, observant, and emotionally present. People would describe him as calm, maybe even lucky. They'd say things just seemed to work out for him. And that word, lucky, you can bet Cain hated that word. You see, Cain worked the ground. His hands were always in the dirt, sweat dripping from his brow. He put in long, grueling days with very little fanfare or applause. In Cain's mind, work was value, struggle was worth. He thought to himself, I'm doing this the hard way. Surely that has to count for something special. Abel, on the other hand, worked with animals, living, breathing things. He didn't struggle against them, he worked with them. He paid attention, noticed patterns, and genuinely cared. Not in a loud, look-at-me way, he just did it sincerely. Then came the day that changed everything. Both brothers brought an offering to God. Cain brought fruit from the ground he had tirelessly worked. Good fruit, earned fruit. And in his head, the calculation was simple. This is what I produced. This should be enough. Abel brought the very best of his flock, not the leftovers, not the extras. He brought the firstborn, the finest he had. He wasn't trying to show off or win a competition. It was just how he operated. Heart first, ego last. God accepted Abel's offering, but he did not accept Cain's. And this is where the story truly begins. Cain didn't explode in anger, not right away. First, there was confusion. Then came the hot sting of public embarrassment. And then that quiet, insidious voice whispered, so, what did he do that I didn't? What does he have that I don't? He looked over at Abel, who stood there, saying nothing. And that silence was a dangerous thing, because Cain's insecurity was already screaming in his ears. He started filling in the gaps with his own dark narrative. He thinks he's better than me. Of course, God prefers him, the golden child. He doesn't even try as hard as I do. Comparison was doing what it always does. It was twisting reality into a weapon. Cain's whole demeanor changed. His face fell. His posture collapsed inward. He was shrinking under the weight of his own resentment. God noticed. He approached Cain not with an accusation, but with an invitation. He asked, "Why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast?" He was offering Cain a chance to talk, to process. God then said, "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" In other words, this isn't the end. You can still fix this. Your worth isn't gone, but Cain wasn't hearing guidance anymore. All he heard was judgment, even though none was there. When people feel unseen, they stop listening. They only hear the echo of their own pain. Cain wasn't really mad at God. He was mad at what Abel represented. Effortless acceptance, approval without a visible struggle. He was mad at the reflection of his own perceived failure. So Cain said to his brother, "Let's go out to the field." His voice was calm. There were no warning signs. And Abel, who wasn't competing, who wasn't suspicious or keeping score, he followed. He had no reason to think his brother wished him harm, but Cain was keeping score. And out in that field, all the bitterness, all the envy, all the thoughts he never dealt with finally found an outlet. Resentment turned into action, and the first human death wasn't the result of some premeditated, cold-blooded hatred. It was the catastrophic explosion of unprocessed emotion. Later, God came to Cain and asked a question he already knew the answer to. "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain's response has echoed through history. "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" It was pure sarcasm. Deflection, the emotional armor of a man who knows he has crossed an irrevocable line but refuses to face it. God's reply was haunting. "What have you done?" "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." The meaning is clear. You can't outwork guilt. You can't hustle your way out of truth. The consequences of our actions have a voice. Cain was then cursed from the very ground he had built his entire identity on. The thing he trusted, the source of his pride, now rejected him. And in that moment, Cain became afraid, not ashamed, but afraid. He cried out, "My punishment is more than I can bear." That line is so important. It shows us Cain wasn't some one-dimensional monster. He was a human being, completely overwhelmed by the consequences of his own unchecked emotions. He was a man who let the pressure build and build until it brought his entire world crashing down. And then God did something remarkable. He placed a mark on Cain, not to shame him, but to protect him from harm. Because even in Cain's catastrophic failure, God refused to let him be erased. He was still valued. Cain went on to live, to build cities, to move forward. But that fracture, that deep wound, remained. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth of this story. Most of us like to think we're able, but if we're honest, we spend a lot of our lives living like Cain, trying so hard, feeling overlooked, and quietly, constantly comparing ourselves to others. Scrolling through social media and feeling that same sting of resentment. The story of Cain isn't just about a murder. It's a timeless warning about what happens when our inner conversations go unchecked. Because the thoughts you leave alone in the dark don't just stay thoughts. They grow, they fester, they shape your behavior. That's how the first brothers became the first, and perhaps most important, lesson. A lesson about catching resentment before it becomes destruction. A lesson about seeing comparison for the poison it is before it becomes your identity. A lesson about breaking the silence before it leads to violence, whether emotional or physical. So the real question this story leaves us with is this: what field are you walking into today, and with whom? And more importantly, what thoughts are you taking with you? Thanks for watching. If this gave you something to think about, consider subscribing for more content like this. See you in the next one.